So recently, I've been accumulating quite a few requests for me to do an anime recommendation video since I haven't in a while, and apparently a lot of you need some stuff to watch. So I'm more than happy to do that. At least I'm happy to do it my style. Let me know if you'd want me to do something like this once a season. This season, the hype anime apparently is 7 Deadly Sins, and a lot of you seem to want recommendations similar to that. So I apologize if the title was a clickbait title, but don't worry, it's even better than what the title said. I'm gonna be breaking 7 Deadly Sins into its 5 components that I think were the most appealing aspects of the anime, and I will be recommending different series to you that I deem to fall into these 5 categories. The reason why I'm doing it this way is because if you like the character interactions, but you don't like the fantasy aesthetic, you'll find something slightly more suited to your tastes. I like this method, I think it works well. You let me know in the comments if you want more like this, maybe once a season. But for now, let's begin. 5 anime like the 7 Deadly Sins, starting with the narrative perspective. I personally love the perspective of the 7 Deadly Sins anime, how it centers around these good guys who are perceived by many as bad guys, going against the grain and going against the government, so to speak, to topple the reign of power that is holding Britannia in a vice. The first anime I'd like to mention with a similar narrative is the Akatsuki No Yona 24-episode series that I personally enjoyed. I don't really want to spoil episode 1 just because I really like the episode 1 of this and of the one I'm about to mention, but the basic gist is there's this girl Yona who for whatever reason has something she doesn't really like about the government. We won't get into spoilers, and she's therefore traveling around amassing the 4 dragons, which are able warriors, to help her on her journey to reclaim justice. I guess in a sense you could say Yona takes the place of Elizabeth in this narrative, and the 4 dragons kind of take the place of the 7 Deadly Sins, but that's not really what I'm getting at all, because the bickering between the dragons and the way they get to learn how to interact with each other is one of my favorite parts of the series, and I find it pretty hilarious like the 7 Deadly Sins. Yona is also a totally different style protagonist than Elizabeth, thank God. And while the series centers on her as opposed to on the Meliodas character, it's about her growth and development as a character as well, as opposed to Elizabeth, who doesn't really grow as a character all too much, unfortunately, at least as far as the anime is now. And the next anime I'd like to recommend in the narrative perspective component of 7 Deadly Sins is Arslan Senki. A very similar theme to Akatsuki no Yona, where it's about a prince who, for whatever reason, has to amass, well, not really several OP individuals, it's more of a realistic medieval setting, you know, a little more tactics, a little less OP magic reflector jutsus. I mean, it's your prerogative, whatever you like, that's why it falls into here as opposed to the fantasy part. And Arslan Senki is also written by the creator of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, if that wins you any brownie points. I personally really enjoyed many parts of Arslan Senki. There were some slow bits, slower than the 7 Deadly Sins, I'd say, but all in all, I really enjoyed that anime, and I hope you will too. The second component is the character interaction. So, one thing I love about the 7 Deadly Sins, every character is a score. I love all of them. I love the way they talk to each other, I love the way they interact with each other, and they just bring the world to life. So, the first on this list for this component is Soul Eater. Soul Eater is a purely character-driven shonen, at least in my mind. A lot of people like the world, but you know, it wasn't really discovered as well as it could have been. Quite frankly, characters took over that show. This series focuses on this school that's training people to become Soul Eaters that have to team up with partners to take down demon souls. Pretty straightforward stuff, but again, the plot is only enhanced by the characters, so I personally love it for that. I know people like it for other things, but you know, I'm not other people. I'm not even close to most other people, as you probably know. Yeah, this is so not my normal video, but that's why it's in this category. Characters were boss. And so we're in the next one, Akane Got Kill. So this series had hype when it aired, but at this point, I think most people dislike the series just because of its poor off the source material ending, which I definitely hear. I mean, unfortunately, I hear it very well, but the character writing that went into this series was really impressive. I personally am a huge fan of strong support casts, and while the protagonist himself was very much not an amazing character, the support cast was of the best I've seen, with one of my favorite tsunderes in anime, where all the girls in the series actually have personalities and accomplishments, and where the guys are just badass after badass, with 3 individual male characters in this series that top every anime character I've seen in the last year. If you're into solid character interactions, I highly recommend Akane Got Kill. And the reason why it's not in the narrative perspective aspect, even though technically it's about a group of assassin guys that teamed up to take down a corrupt government, that's because for me, that's not what mattered. I wouldn't recommend it as a political struggle anime, just because personally, that is not where it's shown at all. And the last one I want to mention is quickly Fairy Tail, even though you all hate it. I know you all hate it because Fairy Tail is the thing that has to be hated at this point. Yes, it deserves hate. I know it's just a lot of shit stuff that happens. Okay, fine. The character interactions are amazing. Shut Shut up. Moving on. Fantasy aesthetic. I love a good fantasy aesthetic if it's done properly. And I have to say, Seven Deadly Sins was in many ways. With the many races and the many kingdoms that build up, with the different powers exhibited throughout the anime. The first thing I want to mention right off the bat, Maggie. One of my all-time favorite series, even though it doesn't deserve to be liked that much. I'm sorry, I may have a personal taste too. It's kind of allowed. I know anime YouTubers these days have to like deep shit, but quite frankly, Maggie was good stuff. As far as this list goes, if I would take a balance between good and between underrated, Maggie falls in the top recommendation spot. The fantasy aesthetic in Maggie, as well as the political aesthetic in Maggie, is amazing, and in my personal opinion, far surpasses the Seven Deadly Sins in all of its strengths. Well, except for maybe the character interactions, but you know, in all of the strengths as far as aesthetic goes. The sheer breadth of the Maggie universe far outclasses almost any other anime I've seen, and the interpolitical aspects of how every society is built up fascinates me every time I think about it. It's one of my favorite fantasy setting anime. I highly recommend you to check out Maggie. Next, we have The Law of Wiki, a rather oldish anime that many people have not picked up for some strange reason, even though it is a really good show, and honestly, not really talked about enough. I would rather not spoil you with details, because it is a slight hindrance for this thing, but to put it this way, it's all one massive tournament arc. Oh boy, fantasy tournament arc thing coming on. Come on, how can you hate this thing? Literally, it's every shonen dream. Moving on to how to pick up girls in a dungeon. The final entry and my fantasy aesthetic component of the Seven Deadly Sins. And that's simply because it's not an isekai anime, and it does have MMO-like mechanics, and the way they traverse in the dungeons, finding new areas and killing monsters and stuff is pretty solid. It also doesn't have a total bitch of a protagonist, only a semi-bitch, which is a massive plus. No, but yeah, it is an enjoyable watch, I have to say. I like the world they crafted, and unfortunately, it's not longer. It's not amazing, but definitely better than a lot of the crap thrown at us these days. Moving on to a well-crafted, overpowered main cast. Long title for this component, but it's important. Many people like an overpowered protagonist. I'm stating a fact now. That's why so many anime get attention. It's an escapist fantasy show, you have an overpowered protagonist, and damn, it's good, until you realize, damn, it failed. So, Seven Deadly Sins is one anime I would definitely say aced the overpowered protagonist curse. And here are 4 others that I think aced it as well. Firstly, One Punch Man. I couldn't move on without mentioning One Punch Man. But since you all probably watched it, we're gonna move on to No Game, No Life. It's a slightly different take on an overpowered protagonist because it isn't on might, it isn't on magic, it's on brain power. And being that we have our protagonists who are trapped in an alternate world where everything is decided by games of sorts, it is one of the most fun watches I have ever experienced with an anime. I ran through those 12 episodes as quickly as I could, and Madhouse hasn't delivered a second season yet because they're borderline assholes. Thanks, Madhouse. Overlord. Season 2 of Overlord is airing right now as well, and it's a totally different take on an overpowered protagonist. Because, as far as protagonists go, this guy doesn't seem all too good and warm and fuzzy and stuff. It also gives the epicness vibe of the OP protagonist without going down the normal warm and fuzzy route that most of them tend to do. The last one on this list of OP main casts that are done fine is Brave 10. I didn't think it was done amazingly, but I did think it was done well enough that you can enjoy this 10-episode series if you've watched everything else on this list. The next component is the journey. I loved the adventuring aspect of the Seven Deadly Sins. I thought it was amazing and it was fun watching them pass their obstacles as well as progress in the plot and narrative. So, One Piece and Hunter x Hunter are good places to head on if you haven't seen them already. Quite frankly, if you haven't seen them already, I don't know why you've watched Seven Deadly Sins. These two are like pretty important to get your hands on pretty immediately. So we're gonna move on to Rage of Bahamut. Totally different vibe from the Seven Deadly Sins as far as OP protagonists, as far as their goals, as far as all that, but the adventure was definitely a fun experience as well. Next, I would like to say Needless, kind of a post-apocalyptic take on the adventure setting. Don't want to spoil too much. Raikenzan, an anime that most people have not seen despite it just airing. The setting itself is pretty cliche, but the adventure was definitely fun to watch and experience as well. And finally, we have our 5th component, which is a standalone anime that I would like to recommend because it doesn't fall into any of the other 4 parts. Aren't I a genius in how I set this up? That was a rhetorical question. Don't comment an army of no's, please. Thank you. The standalone series is Roka no Yusha. Does not fall into any of these categories because, honestly, what I liked about Roka no Yusha doesn't fall into any category. It is one of the most underrated anime I have ever watched in my life. No one talks about it, and it is one of my favorite series. It starts off cliche and boring with 4 episodes of let's go kill the Demon King. So they gather their troops, they're about to move on, and it's like, oh, this is gonna be one of those cliche, boring adventure anime that we've seen 14 zillion of already. But aside from an impeccable cast, the anime turns into a mystery because there are supposed to be 6 Braves that are traveling to kill the Demon King, and there are 7. One is an imposter, and they have to figure out who. The mind games that ensue are amazing. I was on the edge of my seat watching this series every single episode, that is from episode 4 and onward, and I highly recommend it to everyone. I hope you found something you'll enjoy. Let me know if you want this type of video once per season. Feel free to subscribble to join the fan base. 50 honest facts of 7 deadly sins coming very soon, as well as interesting analyses. Stay weird, fam.